I'm really interested in learning how folks set up their games because I think it is very important in terms of the expectations that we are sharing with our party and that we then try to live up to as our game progresses. I'm going to tell you how I set up my game, but of course I'd love to hear from you out there how you set up your games. Now, I was actually recruited to run this game by a player. This campaign started at the beginnings of the COVID lockdown. So they reached out to me and said, hey, we'd like to get a couple of folks together and run a game. Would you be interested in running it? And I said, sure. That sounds awesome. I said, listen, I don't want to run 5th edition. No offense on 5th edition, but I wanted to run something that I'm probably a little bit more comfortable in. So I picked, hey, let's go with BX. Now, we had a little bit of a rotation in a couple of the players, but ultimately one player was somewhat familiar with 5th edition. Another player, 2 other players, or 3 actually, in the rotations were essentially new players. They'd kind of heard of 5th edition, and they were familiar with it maybe just in the pop cultural sense, but they weren't deeply embedded, which was great. So they were all very open to giving this BX a try, but I did give them a full rundown. Here's what BX is like. And I've done this repeatedly even since session 0, but I will always just reiterate for them, hey, remember, this is how this game works. Remember about these aspects. Remember about these things as you're going along. I gave them the rundown on basically what BX is like, how it works. I also gave them the rundown on here's what this campaign is going to be like in terms of how the systems are designed in terms, and this would be in terms of experience points, how the experience points works in BX. It's not really based on killing of monsters. It's based on treasure taken from dangerous places and brought back to safe places. So keep that in mind. The other thing I did is I said, hey, what do you guys want? What do you guys want out of the game? What kind of game are you looking for? Because I said, I'm going to design this off of what you guys tell me you want. So let's talk about what you want. The big things that came out were the big influences they wanted intrigue. The elevator pitch would be Dune meets King Arthur. So lots of political factions, intrigue in sort of a chivalrous, mythical, medieval England sort of place. So those were my marching orders. Great. Then I asked them, well, what do they want to play? Now, I gave them access to, here are your basic BX classes. BX uses a racist class, so you have your dwarves, halflings, elves, and then your human fighter, cleric, thief, and magic user. But what I also did is I said, listen, you tell me what you want, come up with something to make it work. Because from maybe more modern sort of pop culture background, you might look at the very vanilla classes in BX and think, oh, this isn't super interesting. It doesn't really match up with what I'm looking for. And I get that. And I think also, even having maybe only been familiar with 5th edition in a pop cultural sense, you might have gotten a taste of all these more exotic options for players. So I'm not going to fully port over 5th edition and give them all kinds of multi-classing stuff. That would just create too much work. If I was going to do all that, I would just play 5th edition. What I would do is say, listen, let's come up with a class. You have a pop culture reference, lay it on me, and I'll try to make it work. It's not going to be the exact thing. I'm going to try to meld it into this kind of world we're playing in. You're not going to get an exact one-to-one, but I'm going to try to really capture that flavor, and then we could talk about it. So there were a couple classes that came out of it. One was a sort of a dwarven caster class. One was something based on The Witcher, and one was based on the Jedi. We worked through those classes, and then we got into a little bit of kind of backstories, where they came from, how they ended up in this town, how they ended up kind of grouped together, and then they were good to go. Boom. The other big thing we had to talk about is my campaign, this style, is very player-driven. I'm not laying out tracks for you to follow necessarily. The world's going to be dynamic, and there's going to be stuff going on. There are going to be opportunities as a player to see events going on in the world and jump in on them, but I'm not pushing you on one or the other. I really put myself in your hands as a player and say, listen, you tell me where you want to go. So in order to do that, you really have to come up with player-driven goals, because the onus is going to be on the player to decide, this is what I want to do. It can be a character-driven one. It can be a player-driven one. A player may say, you know what, I'm really interested in domain stuff. That's really intriguing to me. Another player may say, I really want to go dungeon delving. Of course, there's going to be dungeons, so we can do that. But it really depends on the players saying, this is what I want to do, and then we make it happen. And My job is to make sure that you have the freedom to do it, and in terms of how it fits in the campaign, to kind of make that work. So there's a lot of collaboration, and I am certainly open to players changing their minds. I always say, don't worry about me. Don't put yourself in the position of, oh geez, Todd prepped this stuff, so we have to do it. I said, don't worry about me. I'll figure that part out. Ultimately, the world is their oyster. They just need to figure out what they want to do and then make it happen. That's how I set up my game, and it's working. I think I can't see into the hearts of my players. Maybe they're all lying to me, but it seems to be working well. And this is something that I will continuously reiterate. I think in terms of setting up, one thing you have to do is you can't just set up once and think that everyone's got the same understanding, and then going forward you don't have to reiterate things, you don't have to reinforce things, you don't have to remind things. You always have to. So periodically, especially since our playing schedule is kind of up and down, I will periodically remind them, let them know, hey, and I also will say, listen, if you guys want to shift the focus, we can do that too, but we have to talk about it, right? Let's sit down and have that discussion on, is this what we want to keep doing, or do we want to do something else? So in a sense, you could say I actually run kind of a rolling setup, but that's how I set my game up. So in some ways, if you've seen my Grinch GM episode, you might think that, boy, I'm not highlighting characters or the players. I'm just having them float around in the darkness of the world without trying to figure out how to make them shine. Well, it's true in that sense that no, I'm not doing that. But in terms of how I've set the whole thing up, the whole game is set up to explore these things that the players want to explore, and then making it in a way that allows them to do it in the way that they want, with them being able to change gears whenever they want. That's how I do it. How do you do it? Let me know. Game on, and I'll talk to you later.